A bear saved this man from drowning. But why? Imagine that you are drowning. Your lungs burn, your strength wanes, and the cold water clings to your body like a vice. The river is too powerful, but you reach for everything. Something massive pulls you up, just as you're ready to pass out for the last time. You wake up on the beach, gasping, your heart racing. However, your breath hitches in your throat as you tilt your head. A bear, not assaulting, not jogging, simply observing. Then it just turns and leaves. Why would a bear in the wild save a person? Was it instinct, an odd gesture of goodwill, or something we're not sure about? Rick Thompson lived to tell the story, and this is his true account. The rationale behind it will leave you stunned. The flood showed no mercy. The beast was frigid and roared, consuming everything in its path. Rick's breath was taken away from him by the shock of cold as soon as he touched the water. His body was frozen in panic as his heart raced. The flow was too powerful. It spun him about like a rag doll and tugged him under. River ignored his attempts to resist it, including kicking his legs and swinging his arms. It pulled him colder and deeper. His vision became hazy. His chest ached. He thought, this is it. He had lost his strength. Around him, the world grew darker. Then, nothing. Rick was coughing and struggling to breathe. The next thing he knew, his whole body was cold, wet, and heavy. His cheek was pressed against the rugged surface of the riverside. He was no longer in the water for some reason. His heart almost stopped as he forced his eyes open. Disoriented, he was sitting close to a huge brown bear. Rick gasped for air. His muscles stiffened. All of his survival instincts told him to flee, but he was immobile. There was no attack from the bear. It didn't growl. It was not fleeing. It was merely observing him. The bear then rose to its enormous height, towering above him, and gently moved away, vanishing into the trees as though its work had been completed. Rick was left staring after it, shivering on the beach. Had he been dragged from the river by the bear? Could it have happened? Or was it all in his imagination? People are not saved by bears. They stay away from them, or worse. But thanks to this bear, Rick was still alive and resting on the riverbank. It hadn't launched an assault. It had not run. It simply sat there, observing. However, why? Was it merely a strange mishap? An instinct from an animal? Or was there something more profound? Something about the relationship between people and the wild that we don't fully comprehend? Rick is telling the truth, and it becomes stranger the more you hear, considering that bears have done similar things in the past. Additionally, after hearing the underlying theories, you may begin to doubt all of your preconceived notions about the natural world. The majority of Rick Thompson's life has been spent in the wilderness. He was a seasoned fisherman who was intimately familiar with Alaska's rivers. He had already gone fishing in these waters dozens of times, but something didn't feel quite right that morning. The air seemed harsher than normal and icy. The huge, wild forest was shadowed by the heavy gray clouds that lingered in the sky. The riverbanks were bordered by tall pine trees, their branches frozen solid, wide, restless, and swift. The river itself was a beast, the kind of water that was unforgiving of errors. Hidden currents lurked beneath its swirling surface, ready to drag anything beneath them like silent predators. And something other, something equally strong and equally frightening, was hiding in the thick wilderness beyond the river. Bears, they owned this land. Rick didn't feel scared. He was aware of the regulations and had seen them before, always keeping his distance. He was unaware, however, that one of them would soon alter his life irrevocably. Rick's fishing rod was sturdy in his hands as he stood ankle-deep in the river. Even through his boots, the freezing water was numbing, but he didn't mind. Hours passed while he waited for a bite. Nothing. He sighed in frustration and decided to cross the river farther, landing on a flat rock that was just below the water's surface. It appeared steady. It wasn't. His foot sprang out from under him as soon as his boot touched the slippery surface. His arms flailed, his body tilted, and his fishing rod slid from his grasp before he could respond. Then he started to fall. As he fell into the river, he let out a piercing gasp. It was an immediate shock. He was unable to draw another breath before the freezing water sucked it out of his lungs. The instinct took over. He struggled to keep his head above water as he thrashed. However, the river was too powerful. Like a rag doll, it seized him and pulled him downstream. He groped at the slick rocks, searching for something, anything, to grasp. He was flipped onto his back by the current. He was unable to breathe, as ice-cold water inundated his lips and nose. The muscles in his body cried out for air. His vision became hazy. There was a crushing sensation inside his chest, and right before the blackness engulfed him whole. He gave up fighting. He went limp. Then nothing. A harsh, scorching breath. Rick's eyes opened as he gulped for breath and coughed frantically, his lungs straining to take in oxygen. His body felt like a block of ice, soaked to the bone and trembling violently. His fingers trembled against the rough, moist ground underneath him. Not water, solid soil. He lived. His vision was blurry, his head pounding. How? The river taking him completely was the last thing he recalled. He wasn't fighting anymore. He feared that he would drown, but he was here, on the shore, somehow. In the water, no. He was trying to figure out what had happened, and his heart was thumping in his chest. With pain, he turned his head slowly, his breath then stuck in his throat. Despite the cold that had seeped into his bones, Rick felt warmth beside him. Something close, too close, radiated a peculiar, constant heat. His body was still slow, half paralyzed by the cold, but his instincts were screaming for him to get moving. His heart almost stopped as he gently turned his head with all of his remaining power. Adjacent to him was a huge, brown bear, not a few feet away, right beside him. With slow, heavy breaths, its muscular shoulders rose and fell, and its thick, wet fur glistened under the pale sky. There was silence, too serene. Rick's breath caught. He stiffened throughout. All of his survival instincts advised him to stay still, to breathe deeply, and to avoid doing anything that would provoke a bear assault. But the bear just sat there, observing, not growling, not baring its teeth, not moving near him, simply observing. Rick felt his heart pound in his ears. His body was still weak, but adrenaline poured throughout his veins, roaring at him to run, for fighting, to do something, anything. But he wasn't able to move. His thoughts were racing. Was this it? Had he stayed alive river only to turn into bear's next meal? He prepared himself, expecting the worst, a lunge, swipe of claws, the devastating weight of the monster. However, nothing took place. The bear just sat there. It didn't snarl. It didn't growl. It didn't approach him. I just watched it. Its deep, dark eyes focused into his, steady, unreadable, not antagonistic, not scared, just calm. Rick took a deep breath, barely daring to take it. His mind was unable to comprehend what was going on. Why didn't it attack? Why had it come here? Rick's thoughts were racing. This was illogical. He had been drowning one moment, his body surrendering as he sank into the icy depths. Here he was, on firm ground, the next day. However, how? His body was too weak to have gotten out on his own. The river's current was too strong to have simply washed him to safety. And then the thought hit him. Was he pulled out by the bear? His eyes widened as he stared at the massive creature beside him. It was not behaving in a predatory manner. It wasn't acting like any wild bear he had ever encountered. It wasn't acting like any wild bear he had ever encountered. It was just sitting there, as if waiting for something, as if making sure he was okay. Rick breathed in short, irregular gasps. The pieces didn't fit, but deep down, he knew this bear had saved him. However, why? Rick's body shook from shock and cold, and his mind was having a hard time believing what was happening. He must be dead. The river should have taken him, but instead of him being here, alive, breathing, shivering in shock, and the bear, it still sat beside him, its massive presence frightening and strangely reassuring. Rick remained motionless, didn't dare. Then, without warning, the bear shifted. It exhaled deeply, almost like a sigh. Slowly it stood. Rick's muscles tightened, his heart pumping extremely hard, and he heard it in his ears. It was this. It was going to attack. However, the bear took no action. It did not make a lunge. It didn't roar. It didn't even give him a curious or hungry look in return. It just turned and walked away instead. As Rick saw the big beast vanish into the trees, its massive form engulfed by the environment, his breath caught in his throat. It was gone in an instant. The question that would follow Rick for the rest of his life was left to him alone. Why? Why would a predator like a wild bear go out of its way to help him? Bears are untamed hunters. People are not saved by them. They hunt, defend their area, and live, but they don't rescue people who are drowning in rivers. Why then? Rick was still shaking as he sat there, looking at the bear's disappearance. This was all illogical. Was it instinct alone? An odd inexplicable peculiarity of nature? Or was it something else? Some animals, including dogs, dolphins, and even elephants, have been observed to exhibit compassion. A bear, though, a creature that ought to view people as either prey or a threat. Was he someone else it thought he was? Was it aware of his struggle? Or was this one of those infrequent, inexplicable, illogical moments? Rick was at a loss for explanations. All he knew was that a bear had dragged him away from impending death. Rick had a nagging suspicion that something wasn't quite right. This is not what bears do. When possible, they stay away from others. What about when they don't? Usually the result is hazardous. A man being saved from drowning by a bear. Not only is that uncommon, it is unheard of. Rick has been in the woods for years. He was aware of the guidelines. The bear is not a hero. They don't behave kindly. Struggling fishermen are not dragged from rushing rivers by them. He was alive because of one, though. The query tore at his thoughts. Why? Was it a mishap? An anomaly? Or was there something going on here that logic and science were unable to explain? No one believed Rick when he eventually returned to civilization and shared his story. People laughed. A few chuckled. Others shook their heads and looked at him doubtfully. You must have washed up on the shore by luck. Maybe the cold made you hallucinate. Bears don't just save people, Rick. It sounded to many like a near-death experience, a drowning man, half frozen and confused, dreaming of unreal things. However, Rick recognized what he saw. Beside him, he could still feel the warmth of the bear's fur. Those dark, deep eyes were still there, studying him, as if to check on him. It wasn't a dream, so why, assuming it did happen? The hypotheses started at that point. People began formulating theories, desperate attempts to explain something that appeared impossible, as word of Rick's story spread. It was thought by some that the bear had lost a cub previously, possibly lately. The protective instincts of animals, particularly mothers, have been observed to extend beyond their species. There are tales of lions taking in orphaned antelopes, dogs nursing kittens, etc. Could this bear have felt compelled to save Rick after noticing him struggling and defenseless? Could it have acted on an old, inexplicable impulse to preserve a life rather than take one if it had ever experienced the anguish of losing a young one to the wild? A more scientific explanation was proposed by others. Animals possess intelligence. Many exhibit a range of complex emotions, including empathy, sadness, and loyalty. Elephants have been known to protect injured people, and dolphins have been known to drag drowning individuals to the surface. Is it possible that some animals have an innate desire to assist when they perceive pain? Perhaps this bear didn't think about helping Rick the way we do, but it just reacted when it spotted a struggling animal. Then there was the most bizarre theory of all. According to a few neighbors, Rick hadn't just run across any bear. Bears are more than just animals in Alaskan folklore. They serve as guardians, land spirits, and mediators between the natural and human worlds. What if this bear was something more than just an animal? A force dispatched to step in, a protector of the wilderness, saving a guy by fate rather than by chance. Rick was at a loss for explanations. Every theory had some merit. However, none could provide a comprehensive explanation. He only knew that he was still alive, and a bear was the last creature he saw on that strand before he woke up. Rick's narrative initially sounded too bizarre to be real. However, when they learned more, they discovered that this was not the first instance of an animal saving a person in a way that defied reason. A woman became lost for days in the woods, all by herself, in the Russian countryside in 2012. She heard wolves prowling nearby, growling as darkness fell. She had no protection. Then suddenly, a huge brown bear showed up. However, it did something extraordinary rather than assault her. It repelled the wolves by refusing to back down. It stayed. It remained close by, perhaps keeping watch over her. Search crews discovered her alive the following morning. The wolves had vanished. The bear was too. One hunter in Canada fell into a deep gully after slipping while pursuing deer by himself. The impact fractured his leg. Hours went by. Nobody was aware of his location. He was immobile. A black bear appeared from the trees as night fell, and the cold began to creep in. The man believed he was done. He waited for an assault. However, he was never touched by the bear. Rather, it nestled down close to him, protecting him as from the icy night air with its warm body. Until daybreak, the bear remained there. The bear got up, gave the man one last glance, and vanished into the forest when rescue crews eventually arrived. The inexplicable is not limited to land creatures. A small youngster was dragged out to sea by a powerful tide off the coast of Italy. Despite his family's cries for assistance, the waves were too strong. He was about to hit the bottom when he was bumped by something below, a dolphin. It kept him afloat until help arrived by pushing him in the direction of the coast. The boy was spared. However, the dolphin had vanished before anyone could give it credit. Rick's story is not a singular incident. Wild animals have repeatedly done things that science finds difficult to explain. Are these isolated occurrences, natural occurrences at random, or do certain animals have a sense of instinct, comprehension, or intellect that is beyond our capacity to completely understand? Rick was unaware. He wasn't alone, though. What are we to make of this, then? A bear dragging a man who is drowning out of a roaring river. A bear protects a lost woman from wolves. An animal that ought to have viewed the hunter as prey kept him warm during the night. Are these merely coincidental? A string of infrequent, haphazard, meaningless events? Or is there something more profound, an implicit bond between the wild and people? People have thought that animals possess an intuition that is beyond human comprehension for millennia, that they can perceive danger, grief, and terror before it materializes, that some people prefer to help rather than hurt in ways we may never fully comprehend. Was Rick just lucky? Or did something within that bear decide to save a life that was in danger? We might never find out. One thing is for sure, though. Nature can startle us in ways that defy reason. After that day, Rick had a completely different perspective on the world. He had been a fisherman in the bush for years, hunting now and then when necessary. However, after being rescued by the exact creature he had once feared, something within of him changed. He didn't hunt again. Rather, he committed his life to wildlife conservation, striving to save the very creatures that he had previously considered to be merely a part of the environment. He still doesn't have an explanation, though. Even after all these years, he was saved by the bear, but why? Was it instinct? An uncommon, once-in-a-lifetime occurrence? Or something far bigger than ourselves? Rick isn't attempting to explain it anymore. However, he occasionally finds himself wondering of those black eyes observing him from that chilly riverbank, while he is by himself in the bush. Did the bear know what it was doing? He wonders. Or was it something more profound, something we would never know for sure? This is the point at which I hand it to you. Do you believe that humans underestimate how empathetic animals can be? Was this bear demonstrating empathy or some other unseen bond between people and the wild by saving Rick? Or was it only an uncommon occurrence, a moment of sheer luck that had nothing to do with empathy? Numerous tales exist of animals assisting people in ways that are beyond our comprehension. Does that imply that they give a damn? Please share your opinions in the comments section. If you liked this story, please remember to hit the notification bell, like, and subscribe for more amazing true stories like this one. I appreciate you viewing it, and I hope to see you again soon.